nights be long when you appear to us like gods on high, which brings you here to mystify.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show. We're with you live on 1160 WVNJ. It's my pleasure today to introduce our guest, Mr. Anthony Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez is the author of UFO Highway. That's a truly interesting book. Welcome to the show, Anthony. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. What exactly does your title refer to, UFO Highway?
You know, when I initially wrote the book, UFO Highway, it had a lot to do with Area 51.
Okay.
But by the time that I was completed with the book, which was a shame that the title stuck, because the Area 51 section was removed. I had conducted a 3-hour interview with Jorg Arnu, who runs the Dreamland Resort there in Nevada, and I had some great stuff, Area 51, but this Dulce interview took center stage, and so did the Human Origin section. And I just had to remove the Area 51 because it detracted too much from the Dulce interview, which was really captivating to a lot of the people that had previewed the book and had said, you really ought to just save the Area 51 stuff for later because it's somewhat old hat. This Dulce business this is what people are going to want to hear. So that's why the book's called UFO Highway. It was kind of an homage to Extraterrestrial Highway. But, the title is what it is, and people don't seem to mind.
I think it's a great thing. It's like sort of a highway to finding out what all this nonsense is about. I really, this secrecy, this running around with hidden bases and underground this and underground that. But how did you get involved? That is a hornet's nest. You had Paul Benowitz, Philip Schneider, and of course the hero, or I should say the most important person of your book, Colonel X. It's a lot of smoke. It's got to be some fire, but a lot of people get burnt by that fire. How did you get involved?
Well, I got involved essentially in 2010, at the beginning of 2010. I had a colleague who I worked with who I hadn't heard from since 2007. Mm-hmm. And, 2007, 2008. And he came forward and said that he had a gentleman who wanted to speak with me with regards to some of the data that I had compiled on my Human Origin section of the book. Now, at the time, he was not referring to a book, he was referring to a blog, because it was a blog that I had at the company that I was working for. It was a major semiconductor company here in Northern California. I had a server, my own personal server within the department, and on that, all of us were allowed to have our own, web pages and stuff. So long as it didn't, step on any toes there with the company, we were allowed to put out whatever we wanted. And so we had personal blogs. Mine had to do with UFOs, aliens, conspiracies, and whatnot. And I met this guy back in 2007, and we struck up a chord with one another, and he kind of disappeared mysteriously. Years later, I hear back from him. This is in 2010, and he puts me in contact with this colonel, and this colonel claims to have worked out of McClellan Air Force Base out of North Highlands here in, near Sacramento, California. And he had an amazing story, which was that he had been employed by the U.S. military to work for this group called DSD-3 in northern New Mexico at an underground facility in Dulce, New Mexico, which is in Rio Arriba County. So I was kind of standoffish at first because I had heard a lot of the stories that had surfaced in the mid-'90s with regards to Dulce, the Ann West, Sherry Hinkle stuff, that came from John Lear, the Dulce papers, the whole Thomas Costello story, and I knew about it. I really wasn't that interested in it. So, and the reason is because I heard that a lot of it was just, lies, conjecture, and supposition, and I didn't know what to make of it. It was all up in the air for me. But the more and more I talked with this gentleman, the more and more I realized this guy was the real deal. He's telling the truth. And there's something definitely going on there in Dulce to this day, and he was a major part of it. surrounding that whole 1979 event, which was true.
Oh, not to interrupt you too much, Anthony, but you'd have to go over what the 1979 event was. A lot of our audience might not know about it, and that's major.
Yeah, and the reason why it's major is because a lot of the stories that emerged in the 1990s and the mid-90s revolve around the same exact event.
Right.
In 1979, supposedly there was a battle there in Dulce in the underground facility between Greys and Special Forces, Black Ops. Essentially, I came to learn that it was this DSD-3 organization, which was the security organization that pretty much runs the facility there in Dulce. There are scientific contractors working there through federal GSAs, the RAND Corporation, IBM, Bechtel, and they're working there in Dulce. And I guess what happened was there was human abductions that were occurring that weren't supposed to be occurring. Some of these contractors got wind of it. They were very upset because they're all working part of the scientific contingent, and they're working with the Greys. What you need to understand is that what I've come to learn is that in Dulce there are two types of Greys. There's this lower-level Greys, which espouse this doctrine, which is over 25,000 years old, and then there's these dissident Greys. This is a new group of Greys that are, on average, 1,000 to 600 years old. They're younger. They're much, much, much younger than these older Greys. And they don't espouse that doctrine. They work closely with the humans. They work on the upper levels. They don't really believe in this progenitor race, or essentially these Anunnakis, these Anus, which the Greys actually call Ostra Albus. So that's what 1979 was about. There was a battle there between the scientific. It was triggered when these scientists confronted Greys, and then all hell broke loose.
And I guess they had very good reason to do that. They must have felt that the human race was getting badly treated. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe,
Absolutely.
and if there is a treaty, which there's also been, theories that there is a treaty with the Greys, obviously they were breaking some of the aspects of that treaty. So,
that's absolutely what was occurring. And, there's actually concrete proof. There's evidence of a human mutilation that took place right there in at the White Sands Missile Range. This was in the 50s, and this was a sergeant. I believe it was a sergeant, and I have his name written down here somewhere. This is information that was shared some time ago. I think it was John Lear or Norio Hayakawa. One of them got the information out there, and I actually was surprised when the colonel had mentioned it to me throughout the course of our interview. He mentioned it, and to me it was like, okay, this is real. This is actually happening there in New Mexico. There's this stuff is real, because this is factual evidence that can be documented and proven.
Well, I think probably the most difficult part of your book would be the fact that, for obvious reasons, Colonel X does not want his real name or his whereabouts known. So there's a lot of skeptics that would say then you're just making this up. Is there some way that you can indicate that he does exist that would not involve saying who he is and where he is?
Well, I can tell you that he works at a university here in Northern California.
Okay.
That's about all I can say. I can't say which one.
Okay. All right. But a lot of this...
I'd like to address that really quickly.
Sure.
You have to keep in mind that this guy pretty much outed a major underground black op facility in northern New Mexico, where I have personally been, and I have met and become friends with the people that live in Dulce, New Mexico. I've met with members of the tribal council. I've met with prominent families from the Jicarilla Apache. And you know what I'm told? I'm told that there's something there. There's something that they can't explain. I've talked to people that says there have been classified activities taking place there since the late 30s, early 40s. They know about it. They're not allowed to talk about it. Some of them are afraid. Now, these people that are out there saying that this Colonel X doesn't exist, there's several of them that took the DD-214 document out of the out of the book, which was sent to me after filing the standard Form 180 from the National to the National Personnel Records Center. Look, the federal government stupidly sent me that document. That's their problem. I made that document public to everyone. Now these so-called other UFO researchers who are just upset because they didn't break the story, they took this document back to a federally funded institution. And they honestly believe that this federally funded institution is going to tell them, why, yes, Mr. UFO researcher, there is an underground base with gray aliens in northern New Mexico working in collusion with the United States military. Are they that stupid? Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, we're going to take a quick break, Anthony. We'll get right back to it. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking to Anthony Sanchez. He is the author of UFO Highway, the book, and also just a phenomenal website, UFOHighwayWebsite.com. And if you have, we'd love to hear what you have to think about all this. It's a very controversial topic. I think Anthony is definitely onto something, and I'm glad he's bringing it to light. If you have any comments, post them on our website right now, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. We'll be right back after a short break. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Today's guest, Mr. Anthony Sanchez, has written a phenomenal book, UFO Highway. Anthony, before we, how does our audience get a copy of your book? I think that's important. I think we may have lost Anthony. But anyway, to get a copy of his book, you would go to his website, UFO Highway. I really would highly recommend it. We have on the phone just now, I'm sorry, John from Bergen County. He has some UFO theories. John, anyway, what would your UFO theories be?
So my favorite theories to research are the Roswell, New Mexico area, and I believe that it's a very genius plot, and I think it's actually a very, very legit story that could possibly be existent. I believe in this stuff. I'm a very, very big believer in this.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of evidence that is circumstantial, and I'm glad to hear that you are a believer. And I think you should get a hold of Anthony's book, UFO Highway.
Yeah.
I think you'll find a lot of backup to your theories. But thank you for calling. Appreciate it. So, Anthony, you back with us?
Yeah, I'm back with you.
Okay, great. Just before the break, we were talking about skeptics attacking people like Colonel X. And, before we go into that, I would just say, first of all, from reading your book and everything else about it, I do believe this man exists. And just think of the moral dilemma that he was presented with. Here are an alien presence that are mistreating humans, and he's threatened with disclosing this, and he has the moral and physical courage to come out and expose it, and to find someone like yourself who is willing to back him. I think these are big steps, and not only you really expose yourself to a lot of not only criticism but skepticism, and people make fun of you, and it really takes a lot of courage to do something like this.
I've faced so much criticism over the release of this book and the information. People who initially I thought were friends have turned against me. I've found so much evidence that proves that there's a concerted effort to shut my book down, to, discredit me, discredit the Colonel, and it's just not going to happen because I'm not going anywhere. I've already went to Dulce and came under some type of physical attack while I was there. My shoulder, my neck, my face, and all the way to the top of my head on the left side became paralyzed. And I was later told that I was subjected to some type of neurotoxin that was meant to kill me, not paralyze me.
Wow.
And that was when I was in Dulce. And it's no coincidence that when I was in Dulce, not only did that happen, but I also discovered these military-grade steel shipping containers for F-5 jet engines in the middle of the Archuleta Mesa, in the middle of nowhere atop the Archuleta Mesa. What were these things doing there? Why is it that when my fellow researcher Rick Prestel and I, approached these things, we noticed that one, they were near a water source, two, there was an abandoned guard shack next to them, or what appeared to be a dilapidated guard shack. And 3, underneath these were wooden slats. Well, underneath one of them were wooden slats, slightly elevating it. And guess what we found? Rushing air. Why would air be rushing, rushing upward from underneath these massive crates in the middle of nowhere atop the mesa? Well, that's indication that there's some type of a ventilation shaft there. And the ventilation shaft means what? It means that there's some type of facility underneath.
Well, what is Dulce like? I don't think our audience... Area 51, you have these aerial pictures. They can't deny there's a base there. And certainly, I still don't understand why the military covered it up. They could have just said, yes, it's a military installation, high secret, top secret, investigations being done there. They didn't even have to get into ETs or flying saucers, UFOs, anything. But Dulce is sort of in the middle of nowhere, isn't it?
You know what's funny about Dulce is this. If you were to go to Google Maps right now and look at the Archuleta Mesa, you know what you're going to see?
What?
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely nothing. You're going to see a barren wasteland, and when you actually go to Dulce, it's the exact opposite.
Really?
It's covered in these very thick forests. I mean, there's thick vegetation and brush and trees everywhere.
Huh.
You don't see that on Google Maps. Google Maps shows you a barren wasteland, when in reality, you're surrounded by rivers. You're surrounded by these lush prairies, these trees. It's amazing the levels that they're going to conceal this place.
That really surprises me. Yeah, wow. Because when you do Google it, it's like a big desert. That's it.
Yeah, that's the farthest thing from the truth. When I was there, I made sure to snap lots of photos because it is a lush area filled with vegetation and brush and trees and water, and it's beautiful. It's quite green, as a matter of fact. It's not what Google Maps, I believe, has been compromised by the federal government to not show you what is really up there.
Well, I mean, that would be easy enough to do. And this is on an Indian reservation, right? Is the Apache reservation?
It is the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. It is sovereign land. It is its own country.
Right.
They can issue their own passports. They have their own president and vice president. It's amazing. When you think about it, that within the United States, there are actually multiple nations, sovereign nations, and the Jicarilla happens to be one of them.
And you spoke to them about this area, about Dulce, and they felt that something had been going on there.
Absolutely. I met with Leon Ravel, who is what was his title? Leon Ravel is the public relations officer for the tribal council. And when I spoke with him, I gave him a copy of the book, and he knew about my work. He knew what I was doing, what I was researching, and he didn't seem to have a problem with what I was doing. I also met with the president of the tribal council. I was introduced to him by a very good friend of mine who's actually in charge of security for the tribal council facility. She's a 13-year veteran police officer of the Jicarilla Police Department. And these people knew what I was doing. They know that I have been, since the beginning of 2010, have been working on this information. I called Miss Sherry Vigil, who worked in the Bureau of Indian Affairs when I was conducting my research, to ask her if there was a military presence there in Dulce. And, she said there wasn't one. I said, wait a minute here. I said, are you sure there's not a recruiting office or an outpost or something? And she said, there has not been a U.S. military presence here in Dulce, New Mexico, since the cavalry was last here in the 1800s.
The cavalry was there.
Exactly.
So for one thing, it does sound, Kate Valentine here, I'm speaking to Anthony Sanchez. He's the author of UFO Highway. We're on 1160 WVNJ. And again, with this feeling that it's in the middle of nowhere, it's not. I mean, it's right in line with so many of these other important things. The big Air Force bases, Kirtland and Holloman.
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean, it's quite a ways from. It's about 150 miles away
but
from.
But it's all on the same line.
Airport.
It's on the same line. I mean,
and when you look at where Dulce's actually situated, it's right there in the Four Corners area. It's,
right.
South of the San Luis Valley in Colorado, and it's at the northern tip of New Mexico, and west of Dulce is Farmington, where there was a whole fleet of UFOs that were seen. There's a famous incident there in Farmington. There's also been massive UFO sightings over Chama, which is south of Dulce, which is just 30 miles south of Dulce. The whole area is fraught with UFO sightings. When I was there recently, I was interviewing some people, a lot of different family members, and residents of Dulce, and they're constantly seeing UFOs over Dulce Rock, Archuleta Mesa, Mount Archuleta. The place is just a hotbed of UFO activity.
Yeah, again, and that bespeaks it's the way people think of it is just a little dumpy place out in the middle of the desert. But speaking of that, I really like your acronym, DUMB, Deep Underground Military Bases. But another thing that you bring out, and I hadn't really thought about, is that all these bases, like Dulce, could also be hubs for a nationwide what they call maglev transportation system.
That's what I actually believe there is. As a matter of fact, John Lear is a huge proponent of that. So is Norio Hayakawa. If you go to UFOhighway.com, there's actually a map there showing all the bases. Mm-hmm. That map is actually representative of the hub, as I understand it, from the Colonel.
It would make sense to me. And then it connects into Denver Airport. And, of course, Denver Airport, my gosh, Stapleton has so much stuff that goes on around that.
Well, Denver International is the continuity of government facility. That's when everything goes to hell in a handbasket. The president, the vice president, the Congress, the Senate, everybody's going to go there, and they're going to get to live while the rest of us die, or we're in FEMA camps. I mean, that's the truth. Yeah. It used to be Greenbrier, but Greenbrier is antiquated, and it does not meet the needs of a modern government. So that's why they spent hundreds of millions of dollars retrofitting and constructing this underground facility, which is the continuity of government facility right there beneath Denver International. There's so much, and there's a lot of Illuminati symbolism, New World Order symbolism right there. It's not even funny.
It's right in your it's right in your face, because I flew into Stapleton and I thought, oh my Lord, look at this. I mean, you might as well just put up a sign in neon. And did you ever make anything out of that huge tent-like structures that they have there? Those big white things. They supposedly represent snow on the mountain, but I was wondering if that was any sort of...
I'm actually told that those represent pyramids.
Okay.
And that's part of this whole Illuminati, Listen, you got to understand something. The Bavarian Illuminati took over this... They infiltrated the Freemasonry movement here in the United States when we were just a brand new, little country. We were just starting out. The Freemasonry movement, which was strong here, was infiltrated by the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, who was essentially the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and quite a few others, elitist type families. And from that moment on, this country has been under a tight grasp of this New World Order structure, which is founded upon the beliefs of the Bavarian Illuminati, which go back even further. So Dulce is fraught with Illuminati symbolism in its township. Listen, here's the funny thing about Dulce. Dulce has a casino. Technically, all the money from Dulce for the Dulce Reservation, the Hickory Apache Reservation, or a majority of it, a vast amount of it, comes from the profits garnered through this casino. But you know what's funny? When I was in Dulce, I literally had to knock on the door to get inside the casino. I had to wait like 6 minutes. And when I finally got into the casino, you know who was in there?
No.
Nobody.
Oh.
There were slot machines, there was tables, it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. I mean, so if you want to feel like you're a whale and walk into a secluded state-of-the-art casino, just go to Dulce.
Okay, I'm a fan of casinos, so I'll try it, but we've got to take a quick break here, Anthony.
But my point, really quickly, my point is that where's the money coming from? If there's nobody going to that casino. That's
a point I want to get back to when we come back, because money trails are very important, as you well know, as you more than likely know. Kate Valentine, I'm speaking to Anthony Sanchez. He's the author of UFO Highway. We're on 1160 WVNJ. We'd love to have your feedback on these very controversial topics. You can post them now on AtlanticCoastUFO.com. For updates on this or all of Anthony's investigations, go to his website, UFOhighway.com. We're right back. Like to hear from you then. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Today's guest is Mr. Anthony Sanchez. He has written a very fascinating book, UFO Highway. Welcome back, Anthony. I'm glad to talk to you. Just before the break, we were talking about the money trail and how this casino was set up in Dulce, but actually is not very active, and probably the Apaches are just receiving money from someone.
I mean, I'm not going to jump out there and say, oh, well, it's the federal government giving them money, but I did ask those types of questions to some of the people that are high up in the administration, and the answer that I received was that there's money generated from a local there's an oil plant there, and then there's the casino, but it just doesn't add up, because as Norio Hayakawa, who's a good friend of mine and a researcher, points out that a lot of the facilities there are some brand new, state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar facilities. The township itself is it's a nice, quiet little township. There's not that much breaking news that ever comes out of Dulce outside of the UFO information. I mean, there was recently a shooting there. It was kind of a rarity that even happened, and it was somebody who was not from Dulce, somebody who was just passing through. But it's just strange that there's like this, I want to call it this complicity, but it's an innocent complicity. It's like, we know there's something going on. We're not going to ask the questions. Yeah. Thank you very much for the check.
Yeah. Well, in a way you understand, too, because, what are they going to do even if they should find out? But to that, we had an interesting question that came in, and they were wondering if you've been able to ask the Apaches or the Hickory Apaches who live around Dulce how long they think these facilities have existed. And besides the vents, have any other man-made structures been found, like security sensors, antenna, anything of that nature?
All right, let me address the first part. The first part is the people that are there. Now, I read all 52 of the Hickory sacred texts, the Hickory Apache sacred texts, and there are stories that on the surface that we know are a couple hundred years old, but when you talk to the elders, they'll tell you that those are actually thousands of years old, because their people have these oral traditions, these stories that are passed down, from one generation to the next generation, and they're not that, different from the Hopi, traditions, which are right next door in Arizona, pretty much right next door. The Hopis talk about the ant people who live underground. The Dulce Hickory Apache talk about the monsters or the little devils that live in the hills there in Mount Archuleta and in the, on the Archuleta Mesa itself. Now, so, yeah, they have always known about, these things that are there, these entities, these creatures. They call them little devils. So think about that for a minute. But also, has there been any other structures found? Yeah, there's been a lot of other stuff found there. Ed Gomez, who's a rancher whose family lived there for over 100 years on the Dulce Reservation. Mind you, these were Spaniards. These were not Native Americans. They were there, for quite a while. Matter of fact, Ed's family was run out of town essentially because they were crippled financially due to the cattle mutilations.
Really?
The cattle mutilations just devastated their family's, income, ability to generate an income, and they were fed up. They gave up, and they invested everything into a grocery store, which they still have to this day. But they gave up the ranching aspect of their life. Ed Gomez found a ventilation shaft on Mount Archuleta, which is west of the Archuleta Mesa. I found the shipping containers, the big military-grade shipping containers, atop the Archuleta Mesa. He found a ventilation shaft at Mount Archuleta, and he only shows that photograph to people who attend his conference. So if you have a cell phone and you're lucky enough to take a picture of it, that's the best way you're going to get it. I'm under the same type of restriction that he is. There's various bits and pieces of information that I only release during conferences, and this is at the request of my friends in the Hickory Apache Nation. And they don't want certain videos circulating, certain photographs circulating, because they're very secretive, private people to begin with. You have to understand the level of racism and subjugation that they've succumbed over the past couple hundreds of years, and they've been dealing with that. Just being Native American, living in the Southwest, it's a tough life. So, that's how I'm going to answer that. There's, Ed Gomez has a factual evidence of a ventilation shaft that he found. And now I actually interviewed a current chief of police of a neighboring community. Now, Janet Saylor of the ASPE organization was there. She was throwing this symposium. Rick Prestel of the Sacramento MUFON chapter was there. The two adult sons of this police chief were there, and we conducted this interview whereby he told me when he was a police officer for 7 years in Dulce, he saw a teardrop-shaped craft emerge from what appeared to be a holographic entrance up where the columnar basalt is at the face of the mesa. Just beneath the radio towers. Now, here's what's interesting. He drew a picture of this teardrop-shaped craft. Now, this guy did not know who Paul Benowitz was. Paul Benowitz is the guy that outed a lot of this information. Well, he started all of this talking about Dulce back in the 70s.
Yeah, he was the original one back then. Kate Valentine, I'm speaking to Anthony Sanchez, author of UFO Highway, 1160 WVNJ. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah. So Paul Benowitz, now, a lot of people don't know this, but Mel Fabregas, who's a talk show guy, and a good friend of mine, Mel Fabregas gave me a copy of these papers, handwritten personal notes, a big stack of them, electronically. He scanned everything in, and he sent me a copy of these, which he acquired through an estate sale. Thank God he did, because they were the personal handwritten notes of Paul Benowitz himself. And these have been verified by the family.
Whose estate was that? Paul's estate?
I'm not sure if it was Paul's estate or the estate that had them in their possession. But what's important is that in these notes, Paul Benowitz had drawn a teardrop-shaped craft, which was nearly identical to what the chief of police of this neighboring community, which was just a year and a half ago, had drawn for me. My jaw dropped when I saw that. I knew there was a correlation, a direct correlation, that he saw what Paul Benowitz saw, and there's no doubt about it. There's some type of a teardrop-shaped UFO there with this lavender to purplish lighting system. And at the front, there's a cabin, and guess what he saw inside? A gray. He saw a gray, flying this craft.
Because I was going to ask you if anyone ever saw anything coming or going into this facility. Because it seems like huge, but again, if it's a maglev hub, they might be coming in from other bases.
My understanding is that there were these dissident greys that were traveled as far as Australia to the Alice Springs. In the 1960s, there were greys working at Pine Gap, which is a big underground facility right there in Alice Springs in Australia. So, did they get there via maglev? I don't know. They may have been flown. I mean, I know that their outer epidermis, which is their skin, is very sensitive to our sun. So this is the reason why they do a lot of their work at night. This is the reason why a lot of the UFO sightings are seen just as the sun is setting, right there in Dulce and or in the dead of night. But recently, there's been quite an uptick in daytime UFO sightings. These huge silver and copper-colored metallic discs the size of football fields.
So now, if these graves have been there for all these centuries, obviously they created the base first, and then the humans moved in after? Is that about how it goes? Or?
That's exactly how it went. These graves have been living there for 25,000 years. Now, this is where Zecharia Sitchin comes into the story. Zecharia Sitchin talks about the Anunnaki, and he tells us about these Anus, these Anunnakis, these race from Sumeria, which is, modern-day Iraq, this group of off-worlders that essentially emerged there in the Mesopotamia, which is the Tigris and Euphrates River. This whole history that I received from the Colonel kind of validates a lot of what Zecharia Sitchin says. And essentially what happened is you had this group that came to our solar system, this progenitor race, which essentially came to live here on Mars. Unfortunately, something happened on Mars, some cataclysmic event that forced them to leave Mars over the course of 100,000 years to ultimately move on to Earth. But Earth wasn't suited to their biology. So they started to genetically enhance themselves so that they could survive here. After about 2 generations of being genetically enhanced and modified, they finally succumbed to their worst nightmare, which was that they were going to have to interbreed with humans, which were this primitive hominid at that time. What they did was they took this primitive hominid and they turned them into us, modern humans. And there's a lot of facts to back that up. According to these graves in Dulce, their archaeological data, these tablets that they have there, which are where all this information was translated, around 250 to 300,000 years ago is when this major transformation occurred in humanity.
Well, we'll have to get back. We need to take another quick break, but we have to get back to that. Kate Valentine, I'm speaking to Anthony Sanchez, author of UFO Highway. We're on 1160 WVNJ. If you have any questions or comments, we'd like to hear them right now. Post them on Atlantic Coast, UFOs.com. For updates on all of this or to get further information, go to Anthony's website, UFOhighway.com. We'll be right back after a short break. Hope to hear from you then. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Today's guest is Mr. Anthony Sanchez. He is the author of UFO Highway. Anthony, again, for someone to get a copy of your book, they would go to your website, UFOhighway.com. Is that correct?
That is correct, UFOhighway.com.
Okay, cool. I'll tell you, before we get into the grays and the humans and all that stuff, we had a quick question from Gail. She was wondering, how common is a teardrop-shaped UFO in places other than Dulce? Do you see them anywhere else? I don't think so.
I personally looked into that. I wanted to find out if there were any other, regions in the Southwest alone that have seen teardrop-shaped craft. And not in the Southwest, my answer is no, because that's where the extent of my research is at the moment. I haven't looked beyond the Southwest, but and I have like 20 years worth of data that I've amassed, in UFO research, articles, news clippings, VHS tapes, and now all this modern stuff from the internet. But I wanted to know if there were any other tribes in the area that have seen teardrop-shaped craft. So outside of the Southwest, I cannot answer that question, but I will be looking into other parts of the country and other countries to see if there have been teardrop-shaped craft spotted. But right now, I know that it's definitely there in Dulce.
Okay, well that's interesting. That alone would indicate something. But before the break, you were talking about the Greys and whatever primitive hominid there was going back, and possible a lot of genetic engineering. If you can't change the environment, you can change the species, I guess. But and then you were also talking about the Illuminati and Freemasons, and there's really, when you talk about conspiracy theories, people feel it goes back like a few hundred years. It actually goes back millennia. And,
that's right.
And you wonder really where the end point is going to be, what the final goal would be of something like that. I can't imagine.
I've been telling people that, there's experts that are now touting this idea that there are two distinct human species that have emerged. And, what they're referring to is these bloodlines. You have this elitist bloodline, and then you have everybody else. So essentially you have the 1%ers versus the 99%ers.
So like,
we're all the 99%ers.
So like David Icke's theory. Yeah, okay. But, I think his theory goes a little overboard with the shape-shifting reptilians. I don't know. That I find a little hard to believe. But the fact that he calls some of the royalty blue bloods and that their blood actually is blue, that would be easy enough to prove.
Well, that is easy enough to prove. And what he's referring to is that a lot of the blue bloods have, RH negative type blood factor. And this is, what type of RH negative blood factor,
And interestingly enough, they're starting to connect RH negative in with abductions, too.
Absolutely. Listen, 70 to 80% of the people that claim to be abductees report UFO sightings, report to have undergone mind control, are type of RH negative, and that's not a mistake, and I'll tell you why. The Colonel made it quite clear to me that this group that was genetically modified was, in fact, given this typo, typo is a universal blood type to begin with. You have to understand that.
Right.
So these primitive hominids, this group, that was their blood type, and it was done on purpose. That was going to allow them to interbreed with these Australbus, who were the descendants of the Anunnaki, who were the descendants of the progenitors. So you have this progenitor bloodline. So that's why you have all this variation in amongst us 99%ers, but amongst the 1%ers, you're looking at a very tightly controlled bloodline, and and even amongst us, there's a lot of typo, a lot of people with typo blood types, universal blood types, and unfortunately for them, they're sometimes indoctrinated and used for these sick rituals and these these new infusions of fresh blood into this elitist group.
Oh, that's not good news for me. We had another question that came in. They were wondering if you plan to release UF Highway as an ebook.
I had UFO Highway released as an ebook, and unfortunately, it ended up on piratebay.org, and there were over 10,000 copies, and it really hurt me financially because I spent a lot of money to go to Dulce, New Mexico, and Arizona, and Colorado, and to research, and the money that I had hoped to recoup through that never materialized, and my marriage came to an end partially because of that, and it was devastating to me. If they want to steal my book, they can steal it online. It's out there. If they want to help me, they can go to ufohighway.com, and for $20, they'll get a really good book filled with lots of information, and I would be really grateful to anybody who bought my book. I would really thank.
Yeah, a lot of, I think that's another thing that's very important fact that you bring up is that anybody studying UFOs, it's still very much controlled with the giggle factor. Like if you're exposed, so to speak, as a ufologist, bam, you're ostracized, certainly professionally in any of the sciences or anything related to that, or any of the military, whatever. Most fields would not be acceptable. So therefore, you're not going to be eligible for grants to investigate this field. And there are some aspects of it that really bear investigating. For example, there are, instead of UFOs, there's let's call them unidentified aerial phenomena.
Sure.
It's these very interesting things. I mean, there are objects, and they're exhibiting some very different, how would you say, physical sort of aspects that should be investigated. But no. And people like yourself that do thorough investigations on a university level do it at your own expense. So, support Mr. Sanchez here, please.
Yeah, I have a degree. I have a degree in computer information systems from an accredited university. And I have many friends with master's degrees and doctorates, and I'm sure that if we decided to, put together some type of a proposal for a grant, I'm sure we could get it. But the point is that that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And it's not, we don't have time to wait for the federal government to tell us 5-6 years down the line whether or not we're approved. We need to get this work underway right away. And unfortunately, for a lot of people like myself, it's coming out of my own pocket. I mean, I'm paying. You don't know the half.
No, I'm sure, and I don't think you're in line for an NIH grant anytime soon. Even the people that were investigating Plum Island were not, and I mean that's a real hellhole. That should be investigated. I'm surprised the government hasn't done it, or the local governments surrounding that particular little island haven't investigated it. But so, what's your final conclusion on this, Anthony? We've come to the end of the hour, and what do you really think's going on?
I think that there is a connection to the Illuminati. There's a connection to this New World Order structure that is in charge of these underground facilities, and Dulce is real. It exists. There is a facility in Dulce. There are grays that are there. They're working in collusion with the United governments, and we need to be aware of this. We need to occupy Area 51.
Okay. Forget Wall Street, huh?
Yeah, but I don't want to occupy Dulce because I've got a bunch of good friends there. And
okay.
So I say let's go occupy Area 51.
Okay, all right, I'll go with you. That sounds like fun. I don't know how we'd get past the guards, but we could try.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for all this interesting thing. And again, how does our audience get a copy of your book? And do you have any new books coming out? Any events or anything?
I have a new book called Project Leonid. It's projectleonid.com.
Cool. Okay.
And that's talking about nanosatellites and the Chinese and underground facilities in China and the forthcoming Anunnaki Wars.
Huh.
So you can go to UFOhighway.com for that book and ProjectLeonid.com for the other book. And I have links at both to share, so.
Okay, wow, that I definitely will go, and I'll pick one up then. Thank you. Okay, so thanks again, Anthony. It was very interesting.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And, of course, thanks as always to Bill and Dave, and thank you to our sponsors. Now, don't forget to mark your calendar for the Betty and Barney Hill weekend in New Hampshire's beautiful Indian Head Resort. It's going to take place September 14th. If you recall, Kathleen Martin and Stanton Freeman's book, Captured, was the recollection of her aunt and uncle's abduction in New Hampshire. And now you're going to have a great opportunity to hear about it firsthand, about this abduction and the family's response to it. So what do we have here? Kathleen Martin, Stanton Freeman, a scenic trip to New Hampshire, a weekend at a beautiful New England resort. Don't miss it, September 14th. Details would be on our website. Of course, the biggest thank you, as always, is to you, our listeners. Please do not forget to subscribe to our still free podcast. You can catch us now on YouTube. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next Friday at 1. Our guest then will be Ed Komarick. He is going to discuss his new book, UFOs, Exopolitics, and the New World Disorder. So that'll take up where Mr. Sanchez has just left off. So until next weekend, this is Kate Valentine, and I'm reminding you, keep your eye on the sky. Bye.
he had an amazing story, which was that he had been employed by the U.S. military to work for this group called DSD-3 in northern New Mexico at an underground facility in Dulce, New Mexico, which is in Rio County. So I was standoffish at first because I had heard a lot of the stories that had surfaced in the mid-'90s with regards to Dulce, the Ann West, Sherry Hinkle stuff, that came from John Lear, the Dulce papers, the whole Thomas Costello story, and I knew about it. I really wasn't that interested in it. So, and the reason is because I heard that a lot of it was just, lies, conjecture, and supposition, and I didn't know what to make of it. It was all up in the air for me. But the more and more I talked with this gentleman, the more and more I realized this guy was the real deal. He's telling the truth. And there's something definitely going on there in Dulce to this day, and he was a major part of it, surrounding that whole 1979 event, which was true.
Oh, yeah, not to interrupt you too much.
Section, and I just had to remove the Area 51 because it detracted too much from the Dulce interview, which was really captivating to a lot of the people that had previewed the book and had said, you really ought to just save the Area 51 stuff for later because it's somewhat old hat. This Dulce business this is what people are going to want to hear. So that's why the book's called UFO Highway. It was kind of an homage to Extraterrestrial Highway. But, the title is what it is, and people don't seem to mind.
I think it's a great thing. It's like sort of a highway to finding out what all this nonsense is about. I really, this secrecy, this running around with hidden bases and underground this and underground that. But how did you get involved? That is a hornet's nest. You had Paul Benowitz, Philip Schneider, and of course the hero, or I should say the most important person of your book, Colonel X. It's a lot of smoke. It's got to be some fire, but a lot of people get burnt by that fire. How did you get involved?
Well, I got involved essentially in 2010, at the beginning of 2010. I had a colleague who I worked with who I hadn't heard from since 2007.
Much, Anthony, but you'd have to go over what the 1979 event was. A lot of our audience might not know about it, and that's major.
Yeah, and the reason why it's major is because a lot of the stories that emerged in the 1990s and the mid-90s revolve around the same exact event.
Right.
In 1979, supposedly there was a battle there in Dulce, in the underground facility between Greys and Special Forces, Black Ops. Essentially, I came to learn that it was this DSD-3 organization, which was the security organization that pretty much runs the facility there in Dulce. There are scientific contractors working there through federal GSAs, the RAND Corporation, IBM, Bechtel, and they're working there in Dulce. And I guess what happened was there was human abductions that were occurring that weren't supposed to be occurring. Some of these contractors got wind of it. They were very upset because they're all working part of the scientific contingent, and they're working with the Greys. What you need to understand is that what I've come to learn is that in Dulce there are two types of Greys. There's this lower-level Grey.
Mighty phantoms of the evening sky, to whom do these celestial steeds belong? When you appear to us like gods on high, what brings you here to mystify?
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show. We're with you live on 1160 WVNJ. It's my pleasure today to introduce our guest, Mr. Anthony Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez is the author of UFO Highway. That's a truly interesting book. Welcome to the show, Anthony. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. What exactly does your title refer to, UFO Highway?
When I initially wrote the book, UFO Highway, it had a lot to do with Area 51.
Okay.
But by the time that I was completed with the book, which was a shame that the title stuck, because the Area 51 section was removed. I had conducted a 3-hour interview with Jorg Arnu, who runs the Dreamland Resort there in Nevada, and I had some great stuff, Area 51, but this Dulce interview took center stage, and so did the Human Origins.
Mm-hmm.
And, 2007, 2008. And he came forward and said that he had a gentleman who wanted to speak with me with regards to some of the data that I had compiled on my Human Origins section of the book. Now, at the time, he was not referring to a book, he was referring to a blog, because it was a blog that I had at the company that I was working for. It was a major semiconductor company here in Northern California. I had a server, my own personal server within the department, and on that, all of us were allowed to have our own, web pages and stuff. So long as it didn't, step on any toes there with the company, we were allowed to put out whatever we wanted. And so we had we had personal blogs. Mine had to do with UFOs, aliens, conspiracies, and whatnot. And I met this guy back in 2007, and we struck up a chord with one another, and he kind of disappeared mysteriously. Years later, I hear back from him. This is in 2010, and he puts me in contact with this colonel, and this colonel claims to have worked out of McClellan Air Force Base out of North Highlands here in near Sacramento, California. And